Okay, welcome students to this video today. Today we will be looking at factoring trinomials that have a lead coefficient other than 1. Okay, so these trinomials will not have a lead coefficient of 1. I would like you to write down a heading today. I would simply write something like this: factor trinomials with lead coefficient other than 1. Okay, I'd like you to write that heading down, please. Factor trinomials with lead coefficient other than 1, or I guess you could say factoring trinomials without a lead coefficient of 1. Any of that would be correct. Okay, so please copy that heading down. Let's move on. Now remember, in all factoring, you always want to pull out what is common first. After you have done this, you are then able to see what kind of polynomial you are left with to factor. Always pull out what's common first. Now here are the steps for factoring basic trinomials with a lead coefficient other than 1. Now remember, the video you watched before, you factored trinomials like this, in which the lead coefficient was a 1. Okay? Or sometimes you had maybe a number here like this, maybe a 2 here, a 4 here, and a 16 here. And you first pulled out a 2, and then you were left over with the trinomial with a lead coefficient of 1. So today, all of the problems that we're going to factor, they will not have a lead coefficient of 1. They will have a lead coefficient other than 1, and these are much more difficult than the other types. Now remember, these are basic factoring. There are harder, more difficult trinomials out there to factor. We're just covering the basics, okay? Here are the steps. They will definitely sound confusing. Just write them down, and then remember, we'll go over each step as we work on some problems together. Okay, let me get a drink here real quick, and let's continue on. Always pull out what's common. That's step number 1. Step 2, make sure the lead coefficient exponent is twice as big as the second exponent. Make sure your third term is a constant term. And by the way, I know I go fast on these, so pause the video when you need to. Step 3, multiply the lead coefficient and the constant term together. After you have done this, list out all of the factors from this product. And I'll explain this a little better later. Listing each set twice. We'll go over that later. Choose the correct set and rewrite the trinomial as a 4-term polynomial. Pull out what is common in the first 2 terms and pull out what is common in the last 2 terms. And then lastly, factor. Okay? So if you've not copied down these 6 steps, pause the video, copy these down, and then restart the video once you're finished. I'm going to go ahead and move on. Let's practice 4 of these problems using these 6 steps. Please follow them carefully, and please note if you have any questions. Here we go. Okay, here's the first problem that we're going to factor. Step 1, pull out what's common. Well, look, is there an x in every term? No, so I cannot pull out any x's. Is there a number that we know of that goes into 2, 3, and 14 evenly? No, so there's no numbers I can pull out. On to step 2. Make sure your exponent here is twice as big as this exponent here, and it is. And make sure you have a constant term here, and you do. So step 2 is done. Step 3. Now here's where it gets a little tricky. Follow the steps carefully. Multiply the lead coefficient, in this case it's a 2, and the constant term together. In this case, that's a negative 14. So you're going to multiply a 2 and a negative 14 together, and you're going to write that number over here. Let's go over that again. Step 3 says to multiply this number here times this number here and write the number over here. Okay, got it? Not too difficult. And then next, step 3 says list out all the factors of this product. So we're going to list out all the factors of negative 28. So 1 times 28, 1 times 28, 2 times 14, 2 times 14, Let's see, 3, 4. 4 times 7, 4 times 7. I believe that's it. Now notice it's a negative 28 because you multiplied a positive 2 times a negative 14, which gave you a negative 28. So your signs would be positive, negative, negative, positive, so on and so forth. There we go. So I've done step 3. Now watch step 4 carefully. Choose the correct set and then rewrite the trinomial as a 4-term polynomial. So let's do step 4 very carefully. Choose the correct set. Okay, look at your middle term. Your middle term is a negative 3. One of these groups adds up or combines to a negative 3, and it's this group right here. A positive 4 and a negative 7 give you a negative 3. So that's the group that you want. Now in other trinomials, when you had a lead coefficient of 1, once you circled this group, you were ready to factor it like this. And you would put an x here and an x here and a 4 here and a negative 7 here. You don't do that now because notice your trinomial does not have a lead coefficient of 1. So these are done differently. Step 4 says rewrite it as a 4-term polynomial. So here's what you do. You bring down your first term, 2x squared, leave a pretty good space here, bring down your last term, negative 14, and then don't put negative 3x. Instead, you're going to write these two numbers. Now notice your term here is an x term. So you're going to put positive 4x, negative 7x. Well, Mr. Earhart, can you do that? Well, sure, I didn't change anything. Look, if you were to combine these two terms, because they're both x terms, would you not get a negative 3 right here? Sure you would. So you've done nothing that is not equivalent to this expression up here. Now, we're done with step 4. Step 5 says pull out what is common in your first two terms and pull out what is common in your last two terms. So let's pull out what's common in your first two terms. In other words, we're going to forget about this part of the problem just for a second, and we're going to focus on these two terms right here. Okay? So here we go. Let's see what we have here real quick. You have a 2 and a 4, so we know the largest number that goes into 2 and 4 would be a 2. We have 2 x's here, and we have 1x here. So I know I can pull 1x out. So if I do that correctly, let's see what I'm left with. 2x times x would give me 2x squared, and 2x times 2 would give me 4x. So there, I did it. Now, let's forget about these first two terms right here, okay? And let's look at these last two terms. Let's factor out what is common in these last two terms. So here we go. I have a negative sign right here, and I never want this first term here to be negative, so I'm going to pull out a negative number. And then what number goes into 7 and 14 evenly? Well, a 7 does. Is there an x in this term and in this term? No, there is not. There's not an x in this term right here. So I cannot pull out an x. So the only thing I can pull out is a negative 7. Now be careful with your signs. You do not want to put a negative x here because a negative 7 times a negative x would give you a positive 7x. And you have a negative 7x right here. So what you want to put is just x, because negative 7 times x is negative 7x. And here you want to put a positive 2, because a negative 7 times a positive 2 is a negative 14. Now, the last step simply says to factor. And here's why I put that. It's really simple. These two parentheses here and here had better be identical. And if they're not identical, you have made a mistake somewhere. Okay? Now, you write your matching parentheses once. So cross those off. X plus 2, x plus 2. You write your matching parentheses one time, and then in the other parentheses, you take this right here, and you put it right here, and you take this right here, and you put it right here. and you're finished. A little more difficult because you don't have a lead coefficient of 1. However, if you'll follow these steps, a lot of teachers, and I'm not sure how your teachers in the past have taught this, but a lot of teachers teach trial and error, which is fine. Sometimes you'll find the answer really quick. Sometimes it'll take a really long time. These steps will work every single time if this expression up here is factorable. Okay, so there's your answer right here. If you were to take this group here times this group here, you would get what you started with up here. Okay, moving on. Let's try 3 more of these. Here we go. We'll go a little faster now. Step 1, pull out what's common. There's nothing common. No number goes into 3, 4, and 4 evenly, and there's not an x in every term. Step number 2, notice my exponent here is twice as big as this exponent here, so that's good. Notice my last term is a constant term, so that's good. Step 3, multiply the lead coefficient and the constant term together and list out the factors. Okay, fine. 3, your lead coefficient, times -4, your constant term, would give you a -12. So we're going to list out all of the factors of -12. So we'll do that very quickly. 1 times 12, 1 times 12, 2 times 6, 2 times 6, 3 times 4, 3 times 4. Okay, it's a -12, so positive times a negative, negative times a positive, so on and so forth. Now, let's go ahead and check off step 3. Step 4, choose the correct set and then rewrite the trinomial with 4 terms. Okay, only one of these sets adds up to a positive 4. Okay, your middle term, and that's going to be these numbers right here. If you take -2 plus a positive 6, you will get a positive 4. So remember what to do. You bring down your first term, you bring down your last term, and right in the middle, instead of putting 4x, you're going to put -2x and positive 6x. Now, Mr. Earhart, why did you put an x with those numbers? Very simply because there was an x with the 4. And if there's an x with the 4, then you want to have an x here. If this would have been an x squared right here, then you would put an x squared here and an x squared here. We'll get into some of those later, okay? But anyways, the reason you put x's with the -2 and the 6 is because of this x right here. So there, we wrote it with 4 terms. Step 5 says pull out what's common in the first 2 and pull out what's common in the last 2. So we're going to focus our attention on the first 2 terms. Okay, first 2 terms. And here we go. I have a 3 and a 2. What number goes into 3 and 2 evenly? Nothing. Okay, I have an x squared and an x. Can I not pull one x out of both of these? Sure I can. I cannot pull 2 x's out of these because they both don't have 2, but I can pull 1 x out of both terms. So I'm going to pull an x out of the first 2 terms. So here I'm going to put 3x because x times 3x is 3x squared, and here I'm going to put a -2 because x times -2 is -2x. Now let's look at your last 2 terms. Cross off the other terms so we're not confused. Okay, let's start with your numbers first of all. You have a 6 and a 4. What's the largest number that goes into 6 and 4 evenly? Well, 2. So I know I can pull a 2 out. Now, do I have an x with both terms? No, I do not. So I cannot factor out an x. However, I can factor out a 2. Well, I would put a 3x here because 2 times 3x is 6x. Here I would put a -2 because 2 times -2 is -4. And step 5 is done, and now we're going to factor. And look, your parentheses should match, and they do. So you write your matching parentheses once and cross them off. And then in your other parentheses, you will put x plus 2. Or x positive 2. Okay, I'm going to go a little faster now on these last 2. So here we go. Step 1, pull out what is common. There's not an x in every term. However, I've got a 10, a 22, and a 4. I can pull a 2 out. Hold on. You never want your first term to be negative. Never. So don't just pull out a 2, pull out a -2. You never want your first term to be negative, okay? So here I would have 5 x squared minus 11x plus 2. Let's see if I'm right, okay? Negative 2 times 5 is negative 10x squared. Negative 2 times negative 11 is a positive 22. And negative 2 times 2 is a negative 4. So we're good. Okay, step 1 is done. Step 2, my exponent here is twice as big as this exponent here, so I'm good there. And also, notice my last term here, my third term, is a constant term, so we're good. Moving on to step 3, multiply the lead coefficient and the constant term together, and then list out all the factors. So here we go. My lead coefficient is 5, my constant term is 2, multiply those together and you will get a positive 10. Let's list out all the factors of 10. So 1 times 10, 1 times 10, 2 times 5, 2 times 5. I want a positive 10, so it's going to be a positive times a positive, negative times a negative, positive times a positive, negative times a negative. Now each one of these sets has a product of positive 10, but only one of these sets adds up to a negative 11. Excuse me. And it's going to be this set right here. A negative 1 plus a negative 10 is a negative 11. So step 4 says choose the correct set and then rewrite it with 4 terms. So I'm going to bring my negative 2 down and I'm going to go ahead and write 4 terms. Now remember, you bring your first term down, 5x squared. You bring your last term down, positive 2. And then right in the middle, you're going to write negative 1x and then negative 10x, okay? And the negative 1 and the negative 10, I got those two numbers from this group right here, and the reason I put an x with each one of those numbers is because there's an x right here with the middle term. Excuse me. So there, I have rewritten my expression with 4 terms. Now step 5 says pull out what's common in your first 2 terms, and then pull out what's common in your second 2 terms. So let's go ahead and focus our attention on the first 2 terms. Let's go ahead and cover up these 2 terms here. There we go. And let's focus our attention. Let's focus our attention on these first 2 terms here. Okay, so I have a negative 2. Now, I have a 5 and a negative 1. What number goes into 5 and 1? Well, nothing. But look at your x's. You have 2 x's here and you have 1 x here. So I can pull out 1 x, leaving me with 5x minus 1. Now, I know it's a little unorthodox to have a big parentheses and then little parentheses on the big sides, but if you'll allow me to do that, it's kind of unorthodox, but it's okay to do. Okay? So there, I pulled out what's common in the first 2 terms, correct? Now, let's see if we can't pull out what's common in the second 2 terms. Let's go ahead and cover this up here so we're not confused. All right. And here we go. Okay, now look at these 2 terms. What is common in these 2 terms? Well, first of all, notice my first term here is negative, so I'm definitely going to pull out a negative sign. I never want this first term to be negative. And I have a 10 and a 2. What number goes into 10 and 2? Well, 2 does. And then there's not an x with both terms, so I can't pull an x out. So I'm going to go ahead and put my parentheses, then go to my big parentheses here. Now, here I would put 5x. Let me show you why. What is negative 2 times 5x? Negative 10x. Here I would put a negative 1. Watch. A negative 2 times negative 1 is a positive 2. And notice your parentheses match again. So because your parentheses match, you're totally good. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. Watch carefully. Bring down your negative 2 on the outside here. And then put, remember, you write your matching parentheses once. So they'll go right here. And then cross those off. And then inside this parentheses, you have an x and a negative 2. So x, negative 2. We're doing some really good factoring now. Okay, this is some really good stuff. Okay, one more problem and we're finally finished. Okay, all right, here we go. Okay, step 1, let's pull out what's common. I've got an 8, an 18, and a 4. Well, the biggest number that goes into all of those numbers would be a 2. So I'm going to pull out a 2. Now, also, I've got 8 x's here, 5 x's here, and 2 x's here. So I can pull 2 x's out of everything. So I'm going to pull 2 x's out. Let's see what we're left with. Here I would have 4 x to the 6th, right? Because 2 times 4 is 8, and x squared times x to the 6th is x to the 8th. Now here I would have 9x cubed, right? Because 2 times 9 is 18, and x squared times x cubed is x to the 5th. And then over here I would have a positive 2, because 2x squared times 2 is 4x squared. Got it? So I've pulled out what's common. Now step 2, I'm going to make sure this exponent here is twice as big as this exponent, and it is. And I'm going to make sure I have a constant term here, and I do. So we're totally good. Step 3, I want you to multiply your lead coefficient 4 times your constant term right here, 2, and then list out the factors. Well, 4 times 2 is positive 8, so my factors would be 1 times 8, 1 times 8, 2 times 4, 2 times 4. I want a positive times a positive, a negative times a negative, positive times a positive, negative times a negative. Now, step 4 says choose the correct set and then rewrite the trinomial with 4 terms. Well, my middle term here is a positive 9. So I want to use these two numbers right here, positive 1 and positive 8. So I'm going to bring down my 2x squared, put a parentheses, bring down your first term, 4x to the 6th, bring down your last term, positive 2, and then right in the middle here, notice, students, your middle term is not an x term, your middle term is an x cubed. So right here you're going to put positive 1x cubed, and then positive 8x cubed. Now, where did I get the 1 and the 8? From right over here. And where did I get the x cubed? From this right here. All right, so we're done with step 4. Now step 5 says pull out what's common in the first two terms, pull out what's common in the second two terms. So I'm going to go ahead and bring down my 2x squared. I'm going to put a big parentheses. And now let's go ahead and take a look at our first two terms. Okay, I have a 4 and a 1. What number goes into 4 and 1 evenly? Well, nothing as far as I know. Notice I have 6 x's and 3 x's. So I know I can pull out 3 x's. Okay? When I do that, I'm left with 4x to the 3rd plus 1. Let's see if I'm right. X cubed times 4x cubed is 4x to the 6th. Remember, when you're multiplying like bases, you add the exponents. Also, x cubed times 1 is 1x cubed. So we're totally good, okay? Now let's go ahead and let's see if we can't pull out what's common in our second two terms right here. Well, first of all, we have a 2 and an 8. What number goes into 2 and 8 evenly? Well, a 2 does. And then do I have x's in both terms? No, I do not. So do not pull out any x's. So it looks like to me I'm going to have a 4x cubed here because 2 times 4x cubed is 8x cubed. And then here I'm going to have a 1 because 2 times 1 is 2. So it's looking pretty good. Notice my parentheses match like they're supposed to. So we're looking pretty good. Go ahead and bring down your 2x squared. And then you write your matching parentheses once, and your matching parentheses is 4x cubed plus 1. And then in your other parentheses, you write these terms that you pulled out, which would be an x cubed plus a 2. Okay? And you did it. You factored this trinomial right here that did not have a lead coefficient of 1. Okay, I hope this video has been a help to you. Now later on we're going to do a video that ties all of these factoring videos together and lets you see them all at once in different examples. But I want you to remember the last video you watched was factoring trinomials that had a lead coefficient of 1. Here, after you pulled out what was common, notice you did not have a lead coefficient of 1, and that's why you had to multiply this number times this number to get this number, and then write 4 terms, etc., etc. Okay, they're done differently. Trinomials that have a lead coefficient of 1 and trinomials that do not have a lead coefficient of 1. Okay, I hope this is a help to you in your factoring problems.